everything was quiet. Didn't know whether there were any enemy soldiers there or not. But one of the fellows who was to my left said, I saw something move down there. And right after he said that, German machine gun opened up on us. And I tasted blood in my mouth. And I had read that if you taste blood, you've been hit in the head somewhere. I didn't feel hit in the head at all. But apparently a bullet had grazed me somewhere, and it was bleeding inside my mouth. So I told the lieutenant, I think I've been hit. And so he said, go back up and get off the line of fire and find a medic. So I did. And when I went to go backwards, this leg didn't want to go. So I looked down and it was all red. Oh my goodness. I didn't know I was hit in the leg, but there it was.
Hi, this is Bruce Lindsay working with Elizabeth Gallo on a continuing project to document the stories of veterans. Today we are with World War II Army veteran Glenn Bushey. Glenn was drafted and served in the European theater during World War II, where he was wounded a week before the end of the war in Europe. He later served in the Korean War.
I'm Glenn Bushey, B-U-S-H-E-Y. Most people seem to know that. There's a picture up there of my dad when he was a teenager and the rest of his family. There were 7 boys and 4 girls in his family. And he lived down south of you'll have to excuse me, I have to think. I can't remember stuff right. I might as well tell whoever's going to look at this, I'm 99 years old right now. And August the 7th, coming up, I'll be 100 if I live. And that's up to God, not me. Anyway, I grew up on a farm south of Dillsburg in York County. Can you understand me?
Sure, you're doing great.
I don't understand myself a lot of the time. Anyway, so my dad and his 6 brothers all became carpenters. They all had the carpenter trade. Well, anyway, I was born in 1925, which happened to be the 5th anniversary of my parents' marriage. And then I kept fussing to my parents, I wanted a brother. So they had a brother. He came along in, I think, 1933, something like that. He's about 5 years older than me. But then I was not happy because I really couldn't play with my brother. He was too young, you know. But I didn't know that when I was fussing to my parents that I wanted a brother. But now he's a friend. He lives near King of Prussia, near Philadelphia. He had a career with the Army he was helping to design ammunition for the war, after the war was over, the World War II.
So how old were you when the war broke out, when World War II broke out?
Okay, I remember we were listening to a radio on Sunday afternoon of December 7th of 1941. I think I was
16?
Yeah. Anyway, they came on the air. We were listening to a religious program. And they came on the air and they said that the Japanese had bombed Pearl Harbor. And of course, that was the great late, the news everywhere about the Japanese bombing Pearl Harbor. Well, that's what caused World War II, as far as the United States was concerned. So when I was in because I was in 10th grade in school, and then 5th, 11th grade, and then 12th grade, and I graduated from Lemoyne High School in 1943. And there was a draft. And so what happened, most everyone who joined the service wanted to be in either the Navy or the Air Corps. It was called Air Corps because it was part of the Army in World War II. But they really needed infantry. They had plenty of people interested in the Air Corps or in the Navy. So they decided, originally they gave people a choice. If I wanted to be in the Air Corps, okay, I could go. But that was ended because they didn't need more air people, they needed the infantry. And of course, the Marines are infantry, but most of my friends thought that was a little too rough didn't want to do that. So my parents said, why don't you just wait, because they're going to call you up. You know that. So when I was called up, you had no choice by the time I went in. Mostly the Army got the people they took, they were infantry, which means they carried a rifle and they walked. And when I was a senior in high school, both the Army and the Navy had programs to train officers for the future because they had no idea how long World War II was going to last. And they would need officers so the Navy had a program called V-12. The Army had a similar program, ASTP, meaning Army Specialized Training Program. And in both of those programs, they sent people to college. The Army did it different from the Navy. The Army would take people and they'd send them to basic training, infantry basic training. After the basic training was over, then they'd assign them to a college somewhere. For the Navy, what they did was they took the people and they sent them to college right away. I guess they thought they needed officers in a hurry compared to the Army. But anyway, and then after they finished college, then they'd go to whatever part of the Navy they might be assigned to. So when I was a senior in high school, a person came from the Navy to my high school, which was in Lemoyne, Pennsylvania. And they said, we have a program, and they told us about the V12 program. So I took an examination, and I passed it, and then I was called up to go to V12, which meant I go to college, and that was pretty nice. So I was called up to go to Philadelphia to take a physical examination, and I was first time I ever went anywhere by myself on a train. And when I was a senior in high school, it was probably in April or May of 1943. And I got on the train at Harrisburg. I went to Philadelphia, and they gave me directions. So I walked to a Navy place they had in downtown Philadelphia to have my physical examination. And I was standing in line along with a lot of other fellows, and a sailor came over to me. He was dressed, like a sailor would. And he said, you come with me. So I went with him, and he measured my height. And he said, I'm sorry to tell you, but you're not eligible to the V12 program because you're not tall enough. They have to be 5'4.5" to be an officer in the Navy. So then he looked at me and said, however, we'd be glad to have you join the Navy as a sailor. And I thought to myself, if I'm not good enough to be an officer, I don't want to be in your outfit. So, of course, I came back home, and that was the end of my Navy experience. So my mother said, just wait. When they call you up for the draft, you may not get drafted. And that's because I had a cousin who had a problem with his ears. They called it a beetle ear in those days. And I had it too when I was younger. So she said, you probably won't have to go because your cousin didn't pass the test because of that. So anyway, a fellow came from Gettysburg College, talking up the college. So I enrolled in Gettysburg College in the fall of 1943. Well, of course, when the draft called me, I passed the physical exam. So I was called up in November of 1943 to go to New Cumberland Army Depot to be inducted into the Army. Well, they also got the information that I had passed the Navy V12 test. So because I had passed that, they decided to put me in the Army ASTP program. So they sent me to Fort Benning, Georgia, which was where the infantry school was. And so they put us, about 3 or 4 of us, on a train. Of course, they didn't tell you where they were going. Everything was secret in those days. Anyway, they put us on a train that stopped at at New Cumberland Army Depot. We didn't know where we were going. We just got on a train, passenger train. Well, we went to Washington, D.C. We came to that station, so we knew we were there. We didn't know where we were going to go from there, but we were there. So they put us on another train, and it turned out it was going to Atlanta, Georgia. Okay, well, then they put us on a steam train in Atlanta, Georgia. They didn't tell us where we were going. But there we went, and the steam engine had smoke coming out. It was a rough ride. Up to that time, we were on diesel, powered trains. But anyway, we got off the train at Fort Benning, Georgia. And they said, oh, this is the infantry school. You're going to be trained as an infantryman. So that was roughly the end of November of 1943. And so, along with all the other fellows that was part of the ASTP program, I was in that. And the fact I wasn't tall enough had no problem with the Army. So all we knew was we were at Fort Benning and we were taking basic infantry training. And that ended around March of 1944. So then we knew that we were part of the ASTP program, which meant we'd be going to college somewhere. So everybody got the notion, well, let's go sign up for the Air Corps. Well, then the next thing that happened was they're not taking anyone into the Air Corps now. So you can't join the Air Corps. Well, then they tried other things, and we ended up, they put us on a train. We didn't know where we were going, but we ended in New Orleans. Well, and we didn't know where, then we got on another train. And from New Orleans, we went north along the Mississippi River. But they didn't tell us where we were going. But we ended up at what was called Camp Livingston, Louisiana. And it was near Alexandria, Louisiana, which is I'm trying to think. Now, Alexandria was on the Mississippi River, and the camp was probably maybe 5 miles or so from Louisiana, in the sticks, so to speak. I mean, they had built, barracks out of plywood and other material that covered the outside of the hut, and that was what we lived in. And so for the winter then, that's what we lived in. They had little stoves, and you could put coal in them and heat it up enough to, when you needed to, take a bath. Otherwise, it was kind of cold, even though it was Louisiana. So we were there. We found out we were in the 86th Infantry Division. And what had happened was they had taken all the men from the 86th that had been there training. Of course, they were training as part of an infantry division to go wherever they're sent. Well, here they took a lot of the men who had finished the training with the 86th, and by that time the war was in North Africa and of course in the Pacific, and they were sent as replacements to the divisions in North Africa, North Africa. So that's where the fellows that were trained in the 86 went to. And then, of course, the Battle of the D-Day happened. And that happened in the spring, of course, of 1944, I guess. But we were still at Alexandria, Louisiana, training. But we heard about it. I remember I was on guard duty, walking around the tents and the huts, and one of the sergeants had a radio, and he had it turned on. And as I walked by, I'd slow up my walk so I could hear what was going on. And of course, the D-Day was taking place, and we were in Camp Livingston, Louisiana, training for whatever, we didn't know what. So anyway, we trained for the summer of 1944. And toward the last of the training, which was in August, we were in it was just lousy conditions. It was hot in Louisiana in August, and we hated it. So anyway, one night we walked and it was dark, and finally they said, okay, you can stop walking now. We were just in a big area. It wasn't maybe little trees, but there weren't any big trees. So they said, it's not going to rain. Just lay down in your raincoats. That'll be enough. Just lay on them and have for the night. So that's what we did. Well, when we woke up in the morning, here, all this area we were in, there was poison oak. Well, and it was hot, as I told you. I had my sleeves rolled up, and so did everybody else. But not everybody catches poison oak, but I did. And my arm swelled up like that. If you didn't, in those days, you heard of Popeye the Sailor Man, and that's the way my arms looked. They were swollen. So they said, you can't do work when you're like that. So they put me in the hospital. And when there was a fellow in the hospital, I think they called him AIDS. He was in his 30s, so we thought of him as an old man. But he could take blood pressure and that sort of thing, and he would give medicine. I think they called him a ward boy. And of course, as I said, he was in his 30s. Well, what was I? I was 19, going on 19. So we went in, and we, meaning other fellows that had what I did, were taken to, and there was a doctor who was a dermatologist sitting there, and he was to tell the ward boy what treatment I was to get. And of course, he talked to the ward boy. I didn't know what he was talking about, but I remember that I woke up in Poison Oak. So after the doctor dismissed us, and the ward boy took me over into where I was supposed to stay while I was in the hospital, I said to him, what did that doctor say? Oh, he said, you got poison. No, he said, you got it'll come to me, but it wasn't poison oak. And the ward boy said to me, you've got poison, don't you? I said, yeah. But the doctor didn't say it was poison. It was something else, some long name. And so the ward boy said to me, if it's all right with you, I'm going to treat you for poison oak. But don't tell the doctor. So every morning, they take me, and along with others, up to, and the doctor would be sitting in the ward, and he'd look at me and say, oh, that's good. Continue the treatment. He didn't tell the doctor that he had misdiagnosed what I had. Well, anyway, while I was in the hospital, the Army again did to the 86th Division what they'd done earlier. Took men from the 86 as replacements to go to Europe. Because, of course, the D-Day was over, but now it was, really rough fighting. The Germans were trying to stop everything that they could. So they took all the men from the 86 that had been trained by the 86 to Europe. So, but I was in the hospital. I couldn't go to Europe. And when I finally was out of the hospital, there were a few left, of which I was one, who didn't get to go to Europe. And all my buddies had gone to Europe. So they sent me home for a week's leave of absence after I was in the hospital. That was in the end of August of 1944. So I came back to Harrisburg on the train, and I went back but I couldn't go to Camp Livingston because the 86th Division were put on railroad cars and went to California for amphibious training, preparing us to invade Japan. Oh, that was great. So California, man, that's something else. So we were at Camp Cook, it was called. Now it's the Air Force base that's in California where they send stuff into the air. Well, anyway, at that time, it was an infantry place. And I had a leave of absence to go from, as I told you, after I got out of the hospital to go home for a week. So while I was home, the division was put on trains and sent to California to Camp Cook. So I got on a train then to go to California by myself. And my mother said, well, you're going to be in that train all the time. I think it was 4 days to get to California from Harrisburg. Because we went on a train to Pittsburgh, to Chicago. Anyway.
You made it to California.
I was on the train to California, and I was eating my mother's sandwiches, which she gave me. And that was great, because otherwise you had to wait in line on the train to eat at a car where you could get food. So I ended up at Los Angeles. And then I had to get a train to go north to Camp Cook. And when I had to wait for that train to leave Los Angeles. So I still had a sandwich from my mother. So I sat in a nice little place there near the railroad station in Los Angeles, and I ate the sandwich. And I thought, oh, this is a nice little place. Well, after I got to Camp Cook, one of the fellows who was from Los Angeles said to me, oh, what did you do when you were in Los Angeles? I said, I sat in a pretty little park across from the railroad station until the next train came north. And he said, you did? Yeah, I said, there was nice fellows there. I was eating my lunch that my mother had sent with me. And he said, those guys that were there, you know what they were? I said, what do you mean what they were? Well, they were a bunch of queers. And I looked at him and I said, well, what's a queer? So the fellows around who heard this, they thought that was hilarious. But I didn't know. How would I know that? So anyway, we started training, amphibious training, jumping on well, I forget what they were called, but I'll think of it.
Mike boats?
No.
Landing craft?
I forget how many. They carried so many men, and then they also had some tanks aboard. And we would go off the shore and in those boats, and they'd come back to the shore, to the what do you call the beach. We turn around and come in and land on the beach. And of course you had to get off the front of the boat. The thing went down and you ran off both sides. You didn't run straight off, because if one of the waves came in and pushed the boat front, it would, you'd get hit in the back of your legs. So you had to go off on the sides. I'll think of the name of the boats after a bit. But anyway, that's what we were doing. And practicing getting off of a landing craft. Well, we kept doing that during the fall of 1944. And when almost Christmas time came, we thought, oh, we're probably going to be heading out into the Pacific to, invade Japan. And the next thing, one of the fellows that worked where they had toilet paper, he said, we're not going to the Pacific. And everybody said, why? What do you mean? Well, we've got a lot of toilet paper. It isn't like we used to go to the Pacific. Next thing, the Germans had that Battle of the Bulge. And the people in Washington thought, oh, we have to get more troops to Europe. So the 86th and 97th divisions were sent east to go to Europe because of the Battle of the Bulge. So they put us on a train. I forget how many days it took, but we ended up in Boston. And they put us on a ship in Boston. That was at one time the Germans had it as an ocean liner. And when the war came along, somehow the Allies got it and they switched it over to a boat to carry troops. So it was a troop carrier. They put us on that ship in Boston Harbor and headed us across the Atlantic to Europe. And there was problems with when we were aboard the ship. The Germans would send submarines, and we'd hear these depth charges going off, but they were being handled by the Navy with a destroyer. So we heard the noise, but fortunately our ships were never hit. And we landed in Le Havre, France. I can't tell you how long it took to get across. I don't remember. But I do remember I was a platoon runner. That means I carried messages from the platoon headquarters to either the squad headquarters or the headquarters of the company or even the battalion. Wherever they needed a messenger sent, I would be given the message. And so they sent me a message to the company commander, his name was Captain Degnan. He was an Irishman from New England. And the officers were up above in that ship, and we sailors were all, it's not sailors, we soldiers, were all down underneath the deck. Well, I don't remember now. I guess the platoon, either the platoon sergeant or the platoon commander, who was a second lieutenant, sent me on this mission to the Captain Degnan. And I don't know what it was about, but he was there where the officers were. And when he came and I knocked on the door, and here he opened the door. He was white. And as I said, he was an Irishman. Usually he was red. And I said, "Hi, Captain Degnan, how are you?" "Go to hell." He had seasickness. I mean, he was seasick. I never got seasick. Well, I gave him the message and I left. But anyway, I remember that. Of course, once we got off the ship, he was all right. But he wasn't right on the ship. So, as I said, we unloaded at camp at Le Havre, France. In one of the camps, they had a number of camps with with tents, and there was a camp, Lucky Strike, a camp. They were all named after cigarettes. I think we were at Lucky Strike, and then there was, if you know your cigarettes, they were the other tents. And then they put us on a train, and we, with what they called box cars, and they hauled 5, if I remember right. I can't remember if it was a 10 or 12 men, something like that. 12 men and 5 or 6 horses. And that's what we were on. We went north through France, through Holland, and then again up to the Rhine River. And we walked from it was they didn't call it Holland, but that's what it was. And then from there we went on trucks to the Rhine River. And we were on the one side of the Rhine River, and the Germans were on the other side. And what had happened, the Rhone River came down from the north, and then they met the Rhine, and the Rhine went on to the Atlantic Ocean. But we were along the Rhine, and the Germans were on the other side of it. And the Germans were also in a pocket like this. And the Rhone River cut down through the middle of the pocket. So they were in that pocket. So in other words, the Allies had them, were surrounded. So they moved our division up around to cut down through the pocket, which is what we did. And there was fighting that was not any fun. I remember we were in a railroad yard, and I remember I could see a friend of mine who was a BAR man, that's Browning automatic rifle. And they're heavy, 20-some pounds. And he was across the railroad yard from where I was. And all of a sudden I could see like that in the railroad yard was smoke that had dried in the yard. And the Germans were shooting machine guns across it where this friend of mine was. His name was Sergeant PFC Benioff. He was from California. And as I said, the BAR rifles were heavy, but he was a big man, so he could carry them. And I saw this, he was like here, and I saw those puffs of smoke dust from the trains in the yard go up as the German machine gun would go. And I saw it come up. Benioff was here. I saw it come here, and I saw them come here. So that meant the bullets went that way. And I thought, oh, I hope Benioff wasn't killed. And the next day he got up and took off with his BAR and just kept fighting, firing his rifle. And that was a close call for him, but somehow they missed him. And then it took about 3 days till we cleared this pocket, as it was called. And the Germans surrendered. So we were taking prisoners. And then when that was done, when the pocket was clear, of course, they didn't need us on the Rhine River anymore because the Germans had surrendered. So they put us on trucks and we went south to Nuremberg and on south to the
Danube River? The
Danube River.
Yeah.
To the Danube. Well, my company approached the Danube River and was given the orders to cross it, but there was no bridge. No bridge across the river, so we had to go across in plywood boats. It's hauled about 6 men, and they paddle on the plywood. So we crossed the river. There was a little town across the river, I would say the size possibly of, probably not as big as Mechanicsburg, but it might have been bigger than Shermanstown. Anyway, we crossed the river on these boats. No one shot at us. We didn't know if there were any German soldiers across the river in that town. But it did have a dike around it because apparently the river has a flood in the spring. Anyway, we were in that town and my platoon was sent straight ahead. The river's here, and then turned and went down the street toward the dike. Another platoon went 1 block further down the street toward the dike. And that's what the company did. And the company has 3 platoons. So they were going 1, 2, 3. And as we were moving down the street toward the dike, everything was quiet. Didn't know whether there were any enemy soldiers there or not. But one of the fellows who was to my left said, I saw something move down there. And right after he said that, German machine gun opened up on us. And I tasted blood in my mouth. And I had read that if you taste blood, you've been hit in the head somewhere. I didn't feel hit in the head at all. But apparently a bullet had grazed me somewhere, and it was bleeding inside my mouth. So I told the lieutenant, I think I've been hit. He said, give me your radio. I had a small radio. He called the 536. And so he took the radio and he said, go to the rear and get off. In other words, we were in a street going this way. The dike was down here shooting at us. And so he said, go back up and get off the line of fire and find a medic. So I did. And when I went to go backwards, this leg didn't want to go. So I looked down and it was all red. Oh my goodness. I didn't know I was hit in the leg, but there it was. So I hobbled back and got out of the line of fire and took my belt off and put it around as a tourniquet until a medic arrived, and then he put a bandage on it. And that was about between 4 and 5 o'clock in the afternoon. And boy, by the time after that shooting of the first machine gun, they all opened up all around us. And it was quite a little battle going on. But about 7 o'clock, it got more and more quiet. And so our troops had taken the Germans. And the ones they didn't kill, they were taking them to the rear, and also, like me, wounded American soldiers. And there were 2 guys, or 3, I don't remember which, came by where I was sitting up against the door of a house. And they said, we're going to take that door off and lay you on it as a stretcher so we can carry you down to the river. Since there was no no bridge, we have to take you over on those paddle boats. And then when we get over, you're going to go on ambulances that are parked over there. So, and while they were doing this, I heard them carrying someone near me, and they kept saying, this is a GI, this is a GI. I said, why are you guys doing that? Well, he said, we've got some German prisoners that we need to get to the rear, but we just push that, he just put them in a boat and shove them out. But the GIs, we paddle them over so they can get on an ambulance. So that's what we did. We got on ambulances and went back to a field hospital, which is what it was called. In the Korean War, they called them MASH hospitals. Same thing. So the field hospital, we got there, and those of us, well, all of us on the ambulances were wounded, of course. It turned out, and I have over here, this was, we had, after the war, we had you know, they'd have reunions. And this was in a paper that the division members says on April 27, 1945, the 1st Battalion of the 341st Infantry crossed the Danube River in assault boats to establish a bridgehead. Company B, that was mine, supported by a machine gun, and Company D led the attack. Casualties were 14 killed in action and 27 wounded. I was one of the 27.
Can we take a picture of that?
See, that was good that I didn't remember that. I remember being on the ambulance and all that, but they took the bullet out of my leg, put me on an airplane to Paris. I was in a hospital there 3 days, put me on an airplane to England, near Cambridge, and I was there until the middle of March. And it told you what the date was, and the war ended in May the 8th.
So you were wounded. You were wounded like 2 weeks before the European War was over.
1 week, really.
Yeah. So you want to go over what you did between the wars and then going into Korea? You want to talk about
how I got to Korea?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, after the war, I went to Gettysburg College, And I was there in the summertime of 1946 when all the men who were at Gettysburg at that time were almost all were GIs, had been in the Army or the Navy. And so the one fellow came into our room and said, "Hey, if we take ROTC, we can get paid $20 a month." Man, that's a lot of money. So a whole bunch of us said, "Okay, we're going to..." Oh, he went on to say that, well, we'll have to go to summer camp for 6 weeks and we'll have to take a commission for 5 years, but there'll never be a war in 5 years. You don't need to worry about that. Well, of course, there was a war in 5 years, the Korean War. And of course, those of us who took ROTC were in the reserves, and including me. And of course, I was called in up for the Korean War in 1951. The Korean War started in 1950. So I was called up and I went to Camp Pickett, Virginia with the 43rd Infantry Division. And I trained at Camp Pickett with the 43rd, and the Russians sort of kicked up their heels, and they were afraid, really, that the Russians might attack us in Europe. So they sent the 43rd Infantry Division as well as the 28th. And the 28th being Pennsylvania National Guard, to go to Europe. But they wouldn't let me go because I had never been to the infantry school. So they sent me to the infantry school at Fort Benning, and I finished that in the spring of 1951 or 52, I forget which. But anyway, I was sent to Korea because they wouldn't send me along with the 43rd because I hadn't been to the infantry school. And when they finished that in the spring of 52, I was, of course, the 43rd was in Europe, but I was sent to Korea. So I got to Korea in May of 1952, and I joined the 40th Infantry Division, which is in the California National Guard. I was a first lieutenant, and I was made the company executive officer. And later I became a battalion S2, which was I'm sorry.
Intelligence.
Yeah, he's a fellow that's in charge of getting information, S2. And so that's what I did to October of 42. And when I was sent back home because they said they had too many people in Korea. They didn't need that many troops. And since we were called up against our will, the members of the reserve were discharged. So in October of 52, I was discharged. And the next year I became a math teacher at West Shore High School in Lemoyne.
That's a good question.
So you've seen a lot in your life and you've had a lot of experiences. What's one thing you would pass on to the younger generation?
Mathematics. And mainly I taught algebra. which was one of my favorite
Oh,
mathematics subjects.
I'm so bad at math.
So,
So do you have any advice for younger people about life?
well, of course, I'm a believer in Jesus, and I think they should become believers in Jesus. And beyond that, just follow him with your life.